Hi, Glass Kickers. Happy Friday. Oh my goodness. It's Friday. You made it. We're almost there. Just half a day left, right? I had it's been a week. I had a friend actually just text me a few minutes ago, and she was like, how are you doing? You gonna make it through this week alive? And I was like, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I might die or someone else might die. And the weather's not helping. I don't know. Like here in Halifax, it has been raining for 3 days now. And that's also not helping matters. It's depressing when it just constantly rains. It's been raining for 3 days. And my softball games have been rained out. In the makeup games have been rained out. And I'm like, I really could use to go it would be really good for me to go hit something. I could use a few at-bats to de-stress. But that's not going to happen. And I haven't been able to run because it's raining, and I kind of wimp out when it comes to running in the rain. I just don't like to, so I usually don't. So now I'm thinking I got to get myself to the gym tonight for something, either body combat or yoga. Could go either way at this point. We'll see how the rest of the afternoon shapes up. But yeah, so thank you for joining me, and thank you for listening to that rant. Thank you for joining me on our live Lunch and Learn Fridays here in the Kick Glass Career Women's Facebook group. Today is the last day of my Update Your Resume Month series. This is the last one. This is the last Friday of September. Oh, it's just flying by, right? Flying by. I hope you're settling into September okay. Kiddos are back to school. Hope your routine is starting to sort itself out, and we're sort of finding some comfort there and getting things going. I know I'm still a little bit working on fine-tuning the schedule and the routine, so I'm hoping things are working out okay for you. So today, as part of the last episode or last training session in the Update Your Resume Month series, we are doing education. I'm going to look at your education section, what you can do to update that. And I'm also going to talk about some of the other information and data that a lot of people want to include in their resume, but they're not entirely sure where they should put it or how they should categorize it so that it all makes sense. So we're going to go through that. Okay? Yes, so your education section, let's start there. This one's pretty easy. Out of all of the sections on your resume, the education section is generally, unless you're a new student, and I have a whole other video training about that, go look for it. But if you're not a new graduate, or if you're not a student, the education section is fairly straightforward. Just need your degree and where you earned it. That's it. If you have graduated more than 5 years ago, you don't need the date on there. Just eliminate the date. Especially if you graduated from university 15, 20 years ago. Anything that's pre-2012, basically. Any graduation dates older than that, just take them right off your resume. The older and older those dates get, the more and more you put yourself at risk for age bias. So just take them off. They don't need to be there. Also, if you have any kind of post-secondary education whatsoever, any kind, and this could mean even you took 2 years of community college courses but didn't actually get a diploma, or if you have an undergrad degree, or you have some sort of technical certification, anything that you did post-high school, if you have anything like that, you don't need to include your high school education on your resume. You can ditch that too. So there's no need to put high school diploma on your resume if you have any form of post-secondary education whatsoever. So that can come off, okay? Courses and certifications. So courses and certifications, I like these in the education section. Throw those in there. Hi, Jessica. Thanks for joining us. Courses and certifications, group those into the education section. So what I would recommend is, if you're titling your section, so I would have education and professional development, or education and certification, or education and additional courses, if that's what you have, and put that all in that same section. Again, depending on how old some of those courses and certifications may be, you may not need the dates there. Caveat on that is if these are certifications that expire, or the licenses. Sometimes with your licenses, especially in healthcare, they do expire, right? So you would want to include the dates there to show that they're still current. But other than that, you don't necessarily need the dates. One thing that I do notice with some people when they're putting this section together on their resume, if they have a whole lot of courses or a whole lot of certifications, which often happens in more technical fields, right? You guys have tons of certifications that you need to take. There's always new technologies, right? So you're always updating, you're always taking more and more and more. I would just go through those certifications and courses and make sure you're sort of taking out anything that is obsolete, because that's going to date you too, right? If you have these certifications or courses that you took on technologies that no one uses anymore, or no one's, or that haven't had to work with for 5 or 10 years, just take those off. Those aren't serving you, so I would take those off. And then just be careful that what you're including for certifications and courses actually are relevant to your career path. So maybe, maybe you are pursuing a career in finance, or accounting or something like that, but you at some point took a personal training course. Well, that doesn't need to be on your resume. I mean, good for you. That's, an accomplishment for you. But if it doesn't really have anything to do with your career path, you don't need to have it on there. Unless, of course, you're applying to be the accountant for Good Life or Crunch Fitness or something, right? Well, then that sort of makes sense. But I would just make sure that you're not overwhelming whoever's reading your resume with tons of courses, tons of certifications that really have nothing to do with the job that they want you to do. Okay? And this is sort of a common theme in all of my training videos, right? Relevance, keeping it relevant, showing your value, communicating your value in a way that the reader is going to understand. So I really want you to be thinking about the reader when you're putting this together, and not just you and what you're necessarily proud of. Really think about the reader. Like, when they read this, how are they going to interpret that about you? How is what they're reading valuable to them? Are they going to see what you have to offer as valuable to them? Keep that in mind. So when you're sort of editing or culling the courses and certifications that you've accumulated over the years, I want you to shed any of the ones that don't serve your career path, any of the ones that aren't going to be obviously beneficial to a hiring manager when they're reading it. Okay? Here's a section or a group of information that often gets sort of like, where do I put this? And that is volunteering, or as I tend to categorize it on a resume, community involvement. It's just, I know that's just a language thing, right? That's just a simple word choice. Instead of volunteering, I say community involvement. And I think the reason that I like it a little bit better is it denotes more leadership, it denotes more connectivity, it denotes, engagement in a community, and a pride, like, I do this for my community, I believe in this, a little bit more than volunteering. Sort of associate volunteer with free. And when people hear free, they tend to think that something that's free has no value. And I don't want anyone to think that just because you volunteer, you have no value. Or, right, even if that happens subconsciously when someone reads it, I don't want that to happen for a client. So that's why I always tend to say community involvement for that section. Even if everything in your community involvement section is technically volunteering, I just want to package it a little bit differently so that it's ingested a little bit differently when it's read. So your community involvement experience or your volunteering experience, I would normally put this in a section all its own, especially if you have like 2, 3 or more volunteer experiences that you wanted to highlight. If you have a whole lot of volunteer experience, if you really volunteer a lot, I would, again, edit that down and make sure that it is just the ones that are more relevant, or the ones that show more leadership, or the ones that are just overall more involved, more work. Those are the ones that I would focus on. Also, just like with your work experience, I wouldn't go all the way back and highlight every volunteer experience you've ever had. So again, I would keep it somewhat current. Try and keep it within the last 5 to 10 year time frame if you have a whole lot. Even if you don't have a whole lot, I should probably clarify here. Like if you volunteered twice in the early 90s, don't put that on your resume. That's not relevant anymore. I mean, like, good for you. That was nice of you back then. But if you're not doing it now, or if it hasn't been somewhat recently, I wouldn't include that on your resume. All that does is highlight the fact that you haven't volunteered since the early 90s. So better to leave that off. I also wanted to say here that there is a slight difference between volunteering and community involvement and your professional affiliations or organizations or board positions. So if you have both of these groups of things, you can put those into separate sections, or you could make one combined section that's community involvement and professional affiliations. So what I'm talking about there is any sort of organization that you belong to. A lot of credentialed professionals have professional organizations that you might belong to. Maybe you pay membership. Maybe there's an international society that you belong to. So even if you're just simply a member of these organizations, I would include that on your resume, especially if it's relevant. Right, so if it's like the Society of Engineers, or like there's the Supply Chain Management Association, there's the Hospitality and Retail International Association, like these major associations, if you're part of one of those, even if you're just a member and you just pay your dues every year, include that on your resume. Because that shows that you are committed to your career path, you're committed to your field. Part of these organizations, the benefit to you is that you stay in the know, right? You keep getting regular updates about what's going on in your industry. You get invited to conferences, and all of this shows really good things about you and your commitment to your career and to your industry and to your field. So you want to include those. If you happen to be in a leadership role of some kind, even if it's for like the local chapter of those organizations, you definitely want to include that, and I would expand on that. So if you are, like the secretary or a co-chair or treasurer for a chapter or for one of these big organizations, I want you to actually put in a bullet point or a couple of sentences showing the capacity or the scope of that role. So how many members do you have in your chapter, or how many members are in the organization? What sort of things do you do to support the operations of that organization? Do you help recruit new members? Do you compose the email blasts? Do you help organize events? Do you help organize travel? Do you bring in guest speakers? Anything that you do to help support the operations of that organization, I want you to actually include that on your resume. That's really important. And while your involvement with these organizations may be volunteer, I would prefer that you highlight them as professional affiliations. It's just a little bit stronger because it's a little bit different and it's a little bit more meaningful from a career standpoint than, supervising a team of volunteers at the local shelter or something. Not that that's not highly valuable work, and it probably is more valuable work than what you're doing with the organization, but from a career standpoint, from an employer's perspective, the work that you're doing with a professional organization is just going to be more meaningful to them. Okay? And finally, I want to talk to you about interests and activities. I've been seeing this on resumes a lot lately, and I find it kind of odd because it's sort of something that has gone by the wayside. We don't really do this anymore. Haven't really done this for quite some time, actually, on resumes. But for some reason, it's starting to make a little bit of a comeback in the resumes that I've been reviewing, which is probably why us career professionals do this Update Your Resume Month content every year, because there are still some resumes, that have those sort of like 1990s formats still, and some of that 1990 content that we can get rid of now. So if you have a line at the bottom of your resume that says interests, and it has something like skiing, tennis, documentary films, delete it. Just delete it. Here's the one exception. There's always an exception, right? This is why working with a resume writer is so important. Here's the one exception. If you have an interest that is aligned with your career goals, then you can include it. But you're not going to include it on your resume as an interest. You're going to include it as something like other accomplishments or other additional relevant experience. Because you're not going to just simply, if it's relevant to your career or if it's relevant to the company you're applying to, I don't want you to diminish it. Sorry. Oh, so I somehow paused the broadcast. Sorry about that. So if you have an interest that is particularly relevant to your career path or the company that you plan to apply for or the industry that you work in, then you're going to include it. But I don't want you to include it just as one sentence that says interests. I don't want you, if it's relevant and it's important and it's a value add for you, I don't want you to diminish it by calling it a simple interest. Okay? It's an accomplishment or it's additional experience. So here's some examples of that so that this can make a little bit more sense, I hope. So let's say one of your interests is pottery or knitting, or maybe you are a skilled seamstress or tailor. And that's something that you do in your free time outside of work. But you also want to work for, or you also work within fashion industry or the crafting industry. Maybe you are looking to be in PR or marketing for Michael's, the Michael's craft store. Well, then this would be relevant. So instead of just saying, oh, I like to sew, I want you to talk a little bit more about that. I want you to say that you've been sewing for how many years. I want you to say, you are comfortable working with what variety of fabrics. Can you work with anything from cotton to spandex to vinyl to leather? If so, put that down. Are you often commissioned by people to sew wedding dresses or figure skating and gymnast costumes? Do you sell your stuff, your knitting or your crafting at craft markets and craft fairs? If so, how much money do you bring in from that? If it's significant, are you requested by people to do different things? Maybe you do. Maybe you create home furnishing stuff. I'm trying to think. There's a word for that, like draperies and bedding and all. Anyway, I just want you to get more specific. So it's not that just like, oh, I sew sometimes. This is what I sew. This is like the prices that I command because I'm good at what I do. I have all of how many years experience you have doing that, the fabrics that you use, how many craft shows and fairs do you attend each year. Maybe you typically make like 5 prom dresses every season because you're sought after in your area. So I want you to expand on your interest to really show your value, to show your expertise in that interest area. Another way that this might be relevant, or another example, and here I'm going to be on a little bit firmer footing, I think, but like in athletics, so if you're looking to work for an athletic apparel brand like Nike or Adidas, Mizuno, or if you're looking to work for maybe more athletic or outdoorsy organization like REI or MAC, then your physical activity interests would be relevant. And again, you're not going to just say, I like to run. I like camping outside with my dog. That's great, but that's not how you're going to present it on your resume. You're going to get more specific. So have you been running, 5 10K races a year for the last 10 years? Have you raced every racing distance there is from 5K to full marathon? Have you run races on like 4 different continents? Are you a member of a run club? Do you help organize running events? Are you a steward or an ambassador of your sport in some way? Do you volunteer coaching? Do you participate in mountain bike races? Have you camped in every national park in Canada or the US? You want to include those sorts of details, those sorts of numbers, those metrics. And in sports and athletics, we have numbers up to yin-yang, right? So there's no excuse. You can find some metrics to include if athletics or sports of any kind are relevant to your career path or to the organizations you're hoping to work for. So you want to infuse your resume with those numbers. And again, you're not going to just call this simply interests. That actually, as someone who does run a little bit, I would not just call running an interest. I'm not just vaguely, mildly interested in running. It's a little bit more than that when, you're dragging yourself up every morning at 5:30 to get your miles in, or, when you're giving up weekends to travel for races. That's more than just an interest. That shows a dedication. That shows a self-motivation. That shows a drive and a work ethic and a goal-oriented personality that goes way beyond interest. So don't diminish your extracurricular accomplishments by just calling them mere interests, okay? So if you have these, you can list it on your resume. This sort of stuff I would put last on your resume under volunteer, under like your volunteering, your community involvement, under courses, certifications, education. I would list this last, but I would title it something like additional accomplishments or additional relevant experience, not just interests. Okay? If you have developed some sort of skill outside of work that's relevant. Don't undersell it as just an interest. It's not, okay? It takes a lot of work to develop some of these skills, from like knitting or pottery or any athletic endeavor, photography. Tons of skill involved there that takes years to develop. So don't downplay and diminish them by just calling them interests, okay? And only include them if they're relevant to your career path. All right? Clear? So that's it. So that covers off education. Remember, get rid of those dates if they're old. I'm going to give you 2012 as the cutoff. Anything older than 2012, get rid of those dates. Courses, certifications, limit the number of those on your resume and make sure that they're relevant. If you're in a tech field, get rid of anything that's obsolete. Doesn't need to be there. Nobody cares if you are certified in some sort of technology that hasn't been used in 10 years. Okay? It's probably not coming back, right? And so get rid of that stuff. Volunteering, it's important. Make sure it's relevant. Make sure it's fairly recent. And title it community involvement. It's just stronger. It's just better. Your professional affiliations and organizations, expand on that stuff. If you have a leadership role, that's important. Expand, give some details there. Size of your organization, members, what you do to support it. And I don't think I can talk anymore about how... Oh my goodness, I lost connection there for a second. But yes, I don't think you need me to go into any more detail about how you can list interests on your resume. But remember, if it's not relevant, if you're not applying for like some sort of athletic role or a role with an athletic organization, you don't need to include your athletic experience on your resume, okay? Make sure it's relevant. You're always thinking about your resume from the reader's perspective. They're looking for how you are going to add value, and so don't include anything that's not obvious or that will seem weird to them. Okay? All right, that is it. That wraps up our Update Your Resume Month series here in the Kick Ass Career Women's Facebook group. Next month, I'm gonna get started with a whole other series of training and live lunch and learns, and I will be announcing that very soon. Well, obviously before next Friday. So that is all. I've talked long enough. It's been like half an hour now. It's time for me to get back to work and try and finish off this work week. And I hope you all have a great weekend. I hope the weather improves around here, and I hope you have beautiful weather for your weekend so that you can relax, unwind, recharge, and get ready to kick some glass on Monday. All right, guys. See ya.